Welcome back to C Studio's How-To series. Today we're going to be going over Blender controls, how to navigate Blender, what things are in Blender, and then object and edit mode using the default cube. As you can see, I already have Blender opened up. This is the welcome screen for Blender. We don't want to do anything here. We just want to click off. You will be greeted by the same thing you do, or you will be in every single Blender new file, which is the camera, the default cube, and the light bulb. Inside of Blender, you have your three default screens, which is your 3D viewport, which is where you're going to interact with objects, your scene collection, where all of your items in your scene are placed. You can create multiple collections. We'll do that in just a second. And then you have your material properties. Now, some of these are global. Some of these are particular to items. You have to have an item selected. Like right now, I have the light bulb selected. You can select things by clicking on them with the left mouse button, and you will see that I have light bulb data that I can change. If I select on the default cube, I now have cube data that I can change. So if you're trying to change particular data, you do have to select on that particular object properties. Or I should say, if you want to change object properties, you have to select that particular object. If you do not know what any of these things are particularly called, or you want to change the layout, you can always click on the top right of every single screen, and you can either change it or figure out what it's called. This is the 3D viewport. This is the outliner / scene collection, and this is the properties. Now you can change the size of everything that you want. You can make it smaller, you can make it bigger. You can scale up and scale down the sidebars however you want to do it. I'm going to leave it pretty much default. And oh, one more thing. This is the 3D rendering down here. This is the playback. Don't worry about this. This is the timeline. I'm going to take this way down as we do not need it today or anytime soon. So that will just be shoved down to the bottom. I am going to enable a screencast add-on. So if you want to bring this little side out menu and it's only on this little arrow right here, all you have to do is click on it and it'll pop it out. But if you do it anywhere else, it won't actually bring it out. So if I do it right here, it doesn't actually do it. There's a little arrow between the 3D viewport and the scene collection, and it will pop this menu out. I'm going to enable an add-on so you can see what I am doing as soon as it actually registers that it's on. There it goes. It does take a second sometimes. So this little add-on will display what I'm actually doing, so you can see the key bindings that I'm using. If your bindings are different, like if you're on a touchpad or using a pen and pad, some of your bindings will be different. I am on a 3-button mouse and a keyboard. Jumping into navigation around the 3D viewport, if you want to zoom in on dead center of the scene, it'll be scroll wheel towards or away from you, and zoom out is scroll wheel towards you. So in is away from you, out is towards you. Now whatever item you have selected, it does not zoom in on that object. It zooms in on the dead center of the screen. So if you want to zoom in on an object to work on it, you will have to select that particular item. Like right now I have selected the camera, then go to the number pad and hit the decimal key or the period key, whatever you want to call it. I will call it the decimal, and it will zoom in and put that dead center, so you can now zoom in and zoom out on that item. Same thing if I go back to the cube, it will zoom in on that particular item, zoom in and zoom out. And if I take the camera, hit the decimal key, I can now zoom in and zoom out. It's also a really good way to be able to get back to the center of the scene, because sometimes you lose where you're trying to go, and you can just select any one of the items that you're trying to find when your scene gets kind of big, and you can just select that particular item and then hit the decimal key, and you will be snapped right back to it. Now for orbiting, let me select the cube again and get to the center. For orbiting, you depress the middle mouse button, otherwise known as the scroll wheel. You depress it and then you rotate your mouse around, and you will orbit around the item. Your mouse will never leave the 3D viewport, even if you have multiple monitors. As you can see, my mouse is going up and it's appearing right back on the bottom. I am rotating 360 degrees. Same thing with the going left or right. I can rotate around it infinitely, and my cursor never leaves the screen, even though I have multiple monitors while I have it depressed. If you want to move around the scene by strafing, you're going to have to depress Shift before you press the middle mouse, and it will let you strafe around the scene left, right, up, and down. Now, if you go backwards and you go middle mouse then Shift, it'll just cause you to orbit. That's all it will do. So if you're trying to strafe, always go Shift first, then middle mouse, and then you can move around the scene as need be. All right, I'm going to return back to the center of the scene. I'm going to snap back to where the default look kind of looks like, so that we can move on to moving objects. So if you want to, we've moved around the scene and now we want to interact with objects. Luckily the hotkey for grabbing things is G. It's pretty intuitive on that one. So you can select any particular item and hit G, and then you can freewheel it around. Now it is by cursor, so it is, you will move it in the direction that your 3D viewport is looking. Like right now I'm moving it on the y-axis, and I'll explain some of that in just a second. And I'm moving it up and down because my 3D viewport is looking across the plane, as opposed to if I was this way, now I'd be moving it more left and right than I would on the x-axis than I would be up on the z-axis, which is up and down. So if you want to send things to a particular point, we will get into that in just a second, but I want you to practice orbiting around, grabbing an object, whether it's the default cube, the camera, or the light bulb, and just kind of placing them around. And when you're done practicing and you feel comfortable, move everything back to a little bit of the center of the scene, and then we will continue on from there. Explaining I'm going to send him back to center so that it makes a bit more sense. All right, so location. Whoops. For the actual grid that you see here, the x-axis is the red line, the green axis, the y-axis is the green line, the red line is the x-axis, and the invisible axis is the z-axis, which is blue, but you can see it in the viewport display of what you are looking at. So if you ever can't figure out where you're at, or these lines aren't visible to you, you can always look at the viewport display and see where you are. You can also navigate around the viewport this way. It's kind of slow. I don't really like it, and it's just easier to do it inside the viewport itself, but this is an option. But it shows you which way you're looking, and it has positive and negative axes. Like right now I'm technically flipped from the normal state. Like normally you come in this way, you're in the negative looking at the positive this way. After you've moved things around, and you want to move things specifically on an actual axis and not by freehand, like say you want to send this default cube down the x-axis and you don't want to move him from the z or the y, you can again grab him. After selecting him, you can grab, and then you can select the axis that you wanted to press by hitting X, Y, or Z relative to the axis, and then you can move your cursor and he will be snapped to that axis. That way you can just send him down in a straight line without ever disturbing the other two planes. He will stay at 0, 0 on the X and 0, 0 on the, 0 on the X and 0 on the Z the entire time. Same thing with X. You can change while you're in the middle of snapping. If you decided you were on the wrong line, it happens all the time because you're turned around and not paying attention. You just hit the next axis that you want to interact with, and you change that one, and I'm going to go to the Z. So the Z-axis, we'll snap them back. If you grab the wrong object, if you grab the wrong object and you realize you're moving the wrong object, anytime you want to cancel whatever you're doing, you can just right-click before you've finish the movement, and it will undo what you were doing. You can also Control Z if you accidentally did finish the movement. You right clicked, or I'm sorry, you left clicked, and you were like, that's incorrect. Like almost every other program, you can just Control Z. And if you realize that was correct, you can Control Shift Z and send it back. So I'm just going to revert him back. So again, just a little bit of muscle memory. We will go snap it on the Z. We're going to move it up here. We're going to grab him. We're going to snap it to the X. We're going to move him over here. We're going to grab him again, snap him on the Y. We'll move it back down. And then inside the properties, if you look down on the, as long as you have the cube selected, you will have object data. It's a little cube right here, and this is object data. This is also a way to move things. This is it's called a transform. You can do rotation, you can do scaling, and you can do location, which is, we're going to send him back to his home, which is 0, 0, 0. And one thing of note, it will send the center of that object to that location. So if you're working with odd looking objects and you're trying to place it in a certain way, you may have to add an offset. Like if I wanted to send him to 1, 1, 1, to kind of put him in the almost look like he's directly teed off on the square for 0, 0, 0, you would have to put in 1, 1, 1. Because he does have a, by default, 2 meter on each axis. So it's 2 meter on the Y, 2 meter on the X, and then 2 meter on the Z. For scaling, if you want to rotate an object, you select the object again, and you hit R. Now it will freewheel, and again it will rotate around the dead center of that in whatever direction your viewport is. So right now I'm kind of looking down the Y, and the X is perpendicular to me, so I'm going to be rotating more on the Y than anything else. If I rotated it around and then grabbed it again, I'm going to rotate more on the X than I am necessarily the Y. It's a bit clunky in this particular freewheeling the rotation, but it is an option if you're just trying to get a figure for exactly what you want and what you think the piece should be doing. So I'm going to send him back to 0, 0, 0 on everything, including the rotation. Some of you may have noticed that we have 4,300 degrees of rotation, which doesn't make a lot of sense. That is more to do with animations and movements and everything. You don't have to worry about it. It is not breaking some laws of physics. It just has more to do with animation and distance traveled than it does anything else. If you want to rotate something 90 degrees or 45 degrees, it will still look like 90 and 45 degrees. So I'll rotate it 45 degrees from the object data on the X. Click, and look, it has been rotated 45 degrees. Same thing with the X, and same thing with the Z. And now we have a perfectly perpendicular cube to the axes. I'm going to send it back to 0, 0, 0. Do that a few times. We will rotate through here. We'll go 90, 90, and 90. Because it's a cube, it doesn't actually do anything. As all of the edges all of the angles on this thing are exactly 90 degrees. So if we go 60, 60, 60, just for some muscle memory, you will notice that there is a difference. And if we wanted to do 10 times that, we can do 600, 600, and 600. Whoop, that's 6,000. And that is a valid input. So sometimes if you do type and it does look weird, double check your actual rotation. You may have actually typed in something wrong. So I'm going to send back to 0, 0, and 0. I usually prefer to do rotation this way, inside the object data or inside the data right here on the item. You can do the same thing here as long as you have that item selected. You can do it up here in the transform. Some people do it this way, some people don't. It depends on the day. I will use this tool, but a lot of times I do it right here, just so that I'm used to interacting with the properties here. It's probably for the best when you're first starting out, is to getting used to going inside the property data and interacting with it here. You can also rotate by doing the same thing that we did before with the scaling. You can snap it to that axis. So we can hit R for rotate. You can snap it to the Z axis. You can rotate it on the Z. You can decide to rotate it on the Y axis. And you can decide to rotate it on the X axis simply by just pressing the axis hotkey that you want to rotate it on. And again, if you don't want to, you decided that was the wrong movement, you can right click off to stop. Just to go back over everything real quick, grab an object, click on it, G, rotate is R, and now we'll introduce, I'm just going to Control Z that. Now we're going to introduce scaling, which is S. So this is how you make things larger, and you can see in the corner over here on the object data that the scale is going much higher. So it's based off, it's not 0 to 1, it is a infinitesimally high number. So whatever the base scale was, which was 2 meters by 2 meters by 2 meters, will be 1. If I send it to 0.5 over here in the object data, it will now be 1 meter by 1 meter by 1 meter. And you will see that right here. So the dimensions are now 1 meter by 1 meter by 1 meter. I'm going to send the scale back to 1. And you will see it's now again once on 2 meters, 2 meters, and 2 meters. Now again, just like the grabbing and rotating, you can either do it freehanding, you can scale the whole thing. So if you select an item and you scale it, it's going to scale everything proportionally. Whatever the proportions that you had, it is going to scale that proportionally. So right now it's scaling everything at the proportion of 1. So if I make this a 0.5 and this a 1, and then I select the item and scale it, it is going to scale everything equally. So it's going to multiply to whatever scale you're, say you're trying to make it 3 times bigger, it's going to be, and just to demonstrate that kind of by hand, we'll get it pretty close. So somewhere right around there. We'll get you very close. Again, you can change the scale. I'm going to change the scale back to 1. Recommend you do the same. Or, I'm sorry, that's the dimensions. I'm going to change the scale back to 1. Whoops. And you can scale again on an axis by selecting that axis. Now it will scale both sides of that axis, both the negative and the positive proportionally. So as you can see, I'm scaling in 2 different directions on the Z-axis. Same thing with the Y. It will scale both the positive and the negative equally, and the X. So you do have to be a little careful with it, because sometimes you're thinking you have something selected and you don't. You have the whole object selected and you just scale everything. And the best thing to do is just right click off or Control Z if you've already selected it. After scaling, one of the things you're going to want to learn is, let me get this transform out of the way. We're kind of done with this at the moment. We're going to do everything else inside the object properties. Here, I just wanted to show you that this and this pretty much both do the same thing. This one just has dimensions up here. But we're going to want to learn how to add things. So Shift A. For right now, we're just going to make a cube. It's going to place it at the cursor. So right now, you see in the scene collection, we have 2 cubes. Now's a good time to jump into the scene collection. So the scene collection is nothing more than all of the objects you have inside of your scene and that are selectable will be displayed in here. Now it is usually recommended to put the light and the camera in their own collection, and the best way to make a new collection so you can put everything else inside of that collection is just to right click inside the collection and then hit new collection and then drag and drop all of these items. Now it doesn't move it in the viewport, it just moves it in the collection. That way, whether you're doing lighting or you're doing camera rendering, if you're trying to find the camera and your scene's gotten really big, you don't have to dig through one big collection. You can just straight go to your top collection, which has the camera and whatever lights you have, and you just snap to them by hitting the decimal key, as long as you have the cursor inside the viewport. And I need to bring this back out because it is not. I don't know why. There we go. All right, screencast is back. I just noticed it was gone. Okay, you can see inside our new collection, and we're just going to name this guy. Double click on him, and I'm going to name him cube. You can see that we have 2 cubes. Now it looks like we only have 1 cube, because both cubes are taking up the same exact space. And since we don't have, this is all fake 1s and 0s, essentially they do not take up any actual space, and they can be right on top of each other. So you can grab either the default cube, which is cube, or the new cube that we've created, which is cube.001, and hit G. So select it inside the scene collector. Grab whichever one you want, hit G, and then take them out, and you will see that you have 2. If you want to add anything in a specific spot, over here in the 3D viewport, you have your select box and you have a cursor. So click on the cursor, and you now, wherever you click in the viewport, you will place a cursor. And the reason this tool is super useful is now whenever I add a mesh, it will add that to the dead center of wherever the object will be added dead center to this cursor. So we're going to Shift A again. We're going to add, this time we'll go ahead and add the monkey. The story behind the monkey, like, really isn't all that important. Every 3D rendering software has like a somewhat of a complex polygon shape, and Blender's is just the monkey. But we're going to place the monkey right there, and we're going to delete him. We're going to move our cursor over here. We're going to Shift A. We're going to add a cube over here, and then we're going to keep the cursor selected, and we're going to move it off screen a bit. I'm going to move him way out here just to get him out of the way. We're going to go back to the select box. Now, if you long hold the select box, you will bring up a menu. Don't freak out. The default option is the select box. If you somehow accidentally click the lasso and you like start dragging and holding, and you see this going on, just go and you see this particular icon, just long hold on this and then click the select box again, and everything will be back to the default view. Now, the reason for the select box is, instead of just clicking on singular items, if I want to grab everything within a certain range, you just drag and hold, and you can now grab multiple items. You can rotate multiple items, or you can scale multiple items at a time, and that's what I'm going to Control Z them so that they're where they were, so that you can interact with multiple things at a time, and in object mode, and you do not have to interact with things individually if you're trying to do things, multiple things at one time. Now that we've added a couple things, let's go ahead and get into if you have the same object, like you're going to make, let's say, some pillars or whatever, and you want to make multiple of the same thing, instead of Shift-A-ing every single time and then adding and then moving it and putting the cursor, you can also just right click on something, and you will see that you can copy. You can Control C and Control V an object. Now, the only thing to note is it will not place it, if you Control C and Control V, it will not do it on the cursor. It will do it wherever the object that you have copied is. So first we're going to copy this one. So you can either right click and copy this way, or you can Control C and then, that was Shift C, Control C and Control V the object. Then grab that object, and you see that it is appearing out of the other one that you have copied. Now, if you go down here and select this one, but you still Control V, you're still going to copy over here, because this is where you copied the object. So this is its origin point. So we're going to grab that guy and move him over here. We're going to come down here to the default cube. At least I think that one's still the default cube. Yes, is cube. And you see that they're all getting different names. So it's cube 001, cube 002. You can rename all of them if you want, but that's, unless you're doing very detailed work and they really matter what they are, you can just leave them like this. This kind of numbering system is fine for most things. So we're going to go to the default cube, and we're going to Control C, Control V here, and you'll see we'll go ahead and grab that particular one, and you can see that it came out of the one that we copied, and not the cursor, how did the cursor go back? But anyways, it comes out of the objects that you have copied. I do not believe you can copy a camera. I don't think I've actually ever tried that. Hey, you can copy a camera. I learned something today. I don't think I've ever done that. Anyways, you can copy lights. It's super useful. I do this all the time on lights. I just because you will be making a lot of lights when you're doing rendering or you're testing how animations look or stuff inside VR chat. Blender's really, really good for how your model's going to look. We'll get into that much later, but I usually use a lot of lights. I use soft lighting and not hard lighting because I don't like to wash everything out, but I just copy the lights. But we'll go ahead and delete those. I'm going to delete the other camera. Did I already delete it? Yeah, I already deleted it. And now that we have all these cubes, we might as well just make something small out of them. So we're gonna select one of them. We're gonna check the position of them. So we see he is at 0, 0, 0. We know they are all 2 meters, 2 meters. So we might as well just make like a cube of a cube. So we need 2, 2, 2. Yeah, this will be fine. So let's go ahead and select this one. Let's put him at 0, 2, 0. Whoops, that's not 0. And you can see it has placed him right next to it, and there is no space between it. We're going to select this guy, and we're going to put him at 2, put him at 2, and then him at 0. And you can see, once again, we have lined up perfectly with no gaps in between it. That's why the object data is so useful, and using whole numbers is really makes life so much easier when you're trying to do stuff by scale or build certain things, so that you don't have to sit there and try to drag it by hand. Like trying to get this in there by hand would be a nightmare. Doesn't matter what kind of system you're using, it is just not fun to do it. It is just much easier to do everything by the object data, whether you want to do it in the transform option here and placing it on the XYZ, or if you want to do it in the object data. I do recommend getting used to doing it this way, so you're used to going into the properties, but it's really up to you on that one, and some people do like doing it the other way. So we'll go ahead and put this guy at right next to his homies, put him at 2, 0, 0, and voila, we have a singular plane for our cube. We're going to put this guy over here. Alright, we're going to put this guy down over here, and we're going to go 0, 4, 0. And then this guy we're going to take down 2, 0, 2. Whoops. That needs to be a 4, and that needs to be a 0. Math is hard. Alright, we've made a small cube column. We can now select all of them by dragging our select tool. We can rotate all of them. We can scale all of them. We can even grab and move wherever we want. I'm just going to Control Z them, put them back where they were. And now we're going to move on to edit mode. Now, there is one quick thing I want to go over on edit mode that I've seen not a lot of other videos talk about, is that edit mode is specific to the object that you are clicking on. So and also to change into edit mode, you can either go into here when you have an object selected and select edit mode here, and you now see that I can interact with this particular cube, or the hotkey for it, because you will do it so often, is tab. And you can now see I'm back in the same mode. Now, the one thing I want to talk about is that even though there are objects that I can edit, I am in edit mode specifically on this object. Even though this cube is exactly like this cube, this cube, this cube, this cube, and this cube, we know because we've scaled them, rotated, and done everything with them together, I am specifically in edit mode on this object. I cannot interact with the other 5 cubes, as I did not select that object to be in edit mode. Just to show you real quick, I'll snap back to object mode, then I'll select this cube, and you can now see that I can only interact with this particular cube. I cannot interact with these other 5 cubes at all. So just to make things a little bit more clear and we'll be able to have access to them, I'm going to snap back to object mode, and then I'm going to delete a few of these guys. You can also Control Shift click on things to holding Control I'm sorry, not Control Shift, but just shift click on things and to multiple select them and delete them, or do whatever you want with them. If you wanted to scale all those, in fact, if you wanted to scale all those, just those, you could do that. If you wanted to rotate all of those, you could do that. Or if you wanted to grab them and move them, you could do that. I'm going to right click and I'm going to hit delete to delete them, just so that we have one cube to interact with, so it makes things a little bit easier. And now we're going to go back, select this guy. We're going to go to edit mode. Now, if you have gotten to the point where you accidentally deleted all the cubes and you're trying to go into edit mode, you will see that we do not have the option, as you have no object to edit. The camera and the light bulb do not have editable properties inside edit mode. So if you're here and you're kind of panicked and don't know what's going on, just go ahead and add a new cube. Just be mindful where your cursor is. That may be off in La La Land from when we moved it over, if you followed me. And now you will see we have the ability to go back into object mode, as we have an object that we can edit with. All right, or I'm sorry, edit mode, you now have an object that you can go into edit mode with. Snapping into edit mode, you now see that we have a bunch of tools. We will get into much of these later, and some of these you will just never use. Just the 80-20 rule. 80% of the time, you're going to use the same 20% of the functions of whatever you're doing. Inside edit mode, there are a few different modes and views that you will need to get used to looking at and interacting with. The first three are the three that are placed right next to edit mode for good reason, because you will change, but especially dealing with VRMs, you will change with these a lot. So you have vertex mode, which vertex are the singular the vertices here. So they are, let me snap to it by hitting the decimal key so you can see a little bit better. So they are the points that make up the polygon. They are the very ends of edges, and multiple edges together also make a vertice. So if I'm going to take the little drawing tool, and I'm going to, drawing tool, and so even though this is just a line, this would be a vertice, and this would be a vertice. If I drew a line from here to here, this would still be a vertice, and this would now be a vertice. If I drew a line from here to here, this is still a vertice, this is still a vertice, and this is still a vertice. I have now made, however, 3 edges, which now make a face in here. So when things refer to polygon, they're talking about 3 conjoined edges that make a face that you can interact with. Like if I make a edge here and a edge here, even though I have 4 vertices, they are not joined, so this is not a face. All right, I'm going to go ahead and delete all that. Maybe. There it goes. It took a second for it to catch up. Okay, just wanted to go over that real quick. So these are the vertices right here. You can see that I can select them here. You kind of see that it highlights a little bit of the edge that you're interacting with, because you are, if I move, grab, rotate, do whatever, the same thing that we will do in just a second, and from object mode that we did inside edit mode, it will distort this part of the edge, and because I'm distorting the edge, it will distort the face. And you can see that I am moving, I'm snapping around and orbiting around, and I can only interact with the very edges of this particular cube. If we go to edge mode, you can see that we can select the edges. We cannot select the faces or the points. We can only select the edges. Now you can, just like before, if you want to select multiple edges or multiple vertices or multiple faces, you can hold Shift, select, or Shift and then click to select multiple things. And same thing with face mode. Now face mode is a lot. Now it does get a little bit different when you're, especially when you're working VRMs, like we're doing stuff inside the eyeball of the face or stuff like that. It does get a little bit harder to see. You have to zoom way in. But anyways, the faces is a little bit easier to see and interact with for the face mode. But for now, we're going to go to vertice mode, because this will make this. Oh, and let me go ahead and add, if you switch between modes, like if you select a face and then you go back to vertice or you go back to edge, you will see that I have these 4 edges selected because I had that whole face. It remembers what selection you had, and it applies the applicable selection to whatever new mode you are in, whatever select mode you're in. So if I go to vertice and I select just these 2 vertices and then I go to edge mode, it will now select that edge. If I go to face mode, it will not select anything because that is not applicable. That is not enough edges to cover a face. If I select 3 edges and then go to face mode, it still doesn't, because that was not enough to close that polygon. So it has no face to select. However, you select a face and then you go to either edge and you will see that all 4 are still selected, and then you go to vertice and you will see all 4 selected because that had enough data to continue down the selection mode. The next thing we're going to want to get used to is working inside of changing our viewport shader, and sorry, not necessarily the shader. I have a bad habit of calling it that, but the way that the viewport looks inside your 3D rendering. So you have wireframe, so you can kind of see through objects. It's not perfectly opaque, but it's pretty clear. You can see all the way through this thing. I can click over here. I can click through it. I don't have to snap all the way to the other side and select that vertice. I can just blast through it and select it from here. You'll do a lot of your vertice operations will be inside of this. You have solid, which is what we were in. You will see that everything is solid. Anything that has a closed face will be gray. Now, the reason why it is gray is because solid mode has no texture applied to it. And then you have material. This is the material view, right? It's material preview. Yeah, material preview. Now, the difference between this one and the next one, which is rendered, is that light is applied in all directions in the material preview. Like right now, we have our light right here, but we see light. This is our only source of light, but we do see light on the bottom and on the sides that the light is opposite of. Now, if we go to the rendered view, you will see that the light, it gets very, very dark over here. And if we go back to object mode by hitting tab, grab this light bulb and take him much, much closer to the box, you now see that the light is being applied and directionally to the way which the light would travel. So we do not have any light down here on the bottom. Just to show you what the difference between rendered and material preview is. So we're going to go back. I'm going to select the cube again over here, or over here. I'm going to go back to edit mode, and I'm going to take it out of. I'm going to go back to wireframe, and it automatically enables X-ray, I should say. So if you click on solid and then you click on wireframe, this is what let you select things through, is the X-ray right here. That's this toggle right here. So every time you go into wireframe, so you do have to be careful with X-ray and multiple selections. Even if I had five layers of mesh, it will select all the way through it, as long as it is on that object. Like if I put another cube right back here, which we will do real quick, snap back to object mode, I'll go back to solid. We're gonna move the cursor. We're gonna place it right here. We're gonna go Shift A. We're gonna add a cube. And we're gonna select this cube. Whoop, that was the cursor. We're gonna go back and select that cube. We'll go back to edit mode by hitting tab. And we will turn on wireframe and X-ray, and you will see that even though there is mesh behind it that can technically be selected, that is not an object. That is not the object that we are in edit mode on. However, if this box had multiple layers of meshes, like say we extruded it, add more faces, and did things to it, and it was still all of the same object, you would select all of everything would blast all the way through this across whatever plane you're going through. Like if I'm looking down the Z-axis, it'll go down all the Z-axis. If I'm looking down the Y-axis, it'll go down all the Y-axis. It'll select everything in X-ray mode that is behind it. So be careful with that. Alright, going back to the edit mode, I'm going to go ahead, snap back to object, go back over here. I'm just going to delete this cube so it's less confusing for people. We're going to go back to object mode. We're going to select first an object. Then we'll go to edit mode. And now we're going to go back to wireframe just so we can kind of, yeah, we'll stay in wireframe. So we'll go to vertice mode, and we will start playing around with how geometry interacts with meshes in scaling, rotating, and grabbing inside of edit mode. Now, object mode, you interact with the entire object. Edit mode, you interact with whatever part of the object that you are trying to edit. So I am just selecting just this one vertice. So if I grab it, I'm only grabbing that one vertice. You can see that, oh, that's me snapping it. You can see that I've accidentally snapped it to an axis at the moment. So I'll Control Z. I'll grab it again. And you can see that the mesh is being deformed in every way that this one vertice can interact on. So it is this edge, this edge, this edge, which implies this face, and this face. So these three faces are unaffected because they have nothing in common with that vertice. Now if I grab this particular edge and I grab it and I pull it out, I've now deformed in some way, shape, or form 100% of this mesh as far as the faces. I may have not interacted with this line and this line, but I have affected these faces, which affect the overall mesh geometry. So we're going to Control Z. You can scale a vertice, but it doesn't really do much. Like, I'm trying to scale anything. I'm trying to pull it out, but because I'm not able to interact with the entire edge or the face, it will not do anything. You can technically do it. There are corner cases where it does work, but 90%, 99.9% of the time, it's going to be like Newtonian gravity where it's not going to do anything. So that is grabbing. And again, if you want to specifically snap it to an axis and move directly on that axis, you can snap it by depressing that button. So Z, X, or Y. You can snap it, you can invert it, you can completely go the other way if you want. You can really mess the mesh up. Let me go back to solid and kind of show you. So you've made this weird polygon with still only enough points to make a cube, which is 8. And I'm going to Control Z it, go back to wireframe. You can snap it on the Y, you can snap it on the X, and you can snap it on the Z. You can move any individual vertice, and you can move multiple vertices if you want at the same time and really mess things up and really confuse it. Now, whatever you grab, if you grab the vertice, the distance between these two vertices that I have grabbed will never change in this mode because I have selected those two vertices and they had a fixed point between them. So let's just say they were 1.5 meters apart. They will stay 1.5 meters apart forever. They will never, when you have multiple selected, no matter how far I move them, they will stay that 1.5 meters apart. In edges mode, we have a little bit, you can do a little bit more with edges. So you can grab it, you can deform the mesh just like you normally would. Z, Y, and X. But in edge mode, you can clearly see when you're rotating things that it does deform the entire mesh of something. Like, we'll leave it like that. We'll see that we have very deformed this guy on this edge that we have selected. We will Control Z him. I'll just leave it in solid mode for edge mode for the time being. If you scale it, you will see that we are scaling it across the line. So a line or an edge is a straight line, so the only thing you're going to do is scale it in the direction that the line is drawn. So basically this one is going across the y-axis, so I'm going to scale it on the y-axis. Even if I snap it to the z, it's not going to do anything. If I snap it to the x, it doesn't do anything because this particular one is scaled to the is facing the y-axis. Same. This one, if I try to scale it on the z, it does nothing. If I try to scale it on the y, it doesn't do anything. But if I scale it on the x, because it is facing the x-axis, it will. You will draw it in, you will scale it in that direction, which is another reason why I highly recommend using the grid squares and the transform tool, to whichever way you're doing it. And if you rotate the object 45 degrees, it will change. So we'll try to scale it on the Z, and you will see that it kind of does it because it's trying to do it directly in that line. So it's kind of going weird. If I try to scale it on the Y, whoop, it again kind of does the same problem. And if I scale it on the, I gotta grab it again. So if I grab it again and I scale it on the X, it does absolutely nothing. If you wanted to scale it, you would just freehand it. There will be some math involved when you rotate objects. So normally when you scale things, you want to be across the 3 planes perpendicular, or at least not perpendicular to the 3 planes, in some way, shape, or form being on the 3 planes, and then scale it. Then go ahead and do your rotation. That way it's much easier to work with. So we're going to put him back to 0. We're going to go to faces. We're going to scale faces. Now, because you are scaling a whole face, you are grabbing 4 individual lines. First we're going to grab them, which is basically you are just taking that face and you are moving it farther away. So we'll select this guy again. If you scale him, you make him bigger or smaller, proportionally across all 4 edges. And if it's a triangle, it's going to be all 3 edges. If it's a pentagon, it's going to be all 5, so on and so forth. You will scale them proportionally so they will all end up the same size that they were when you first started scaling. Like if this one was 2 meters and this one was 1 meter and this one was 2 meters and this one was 1 meter and we had a rectangle, it would go by, so instead of going 4 by 4, it would go 4 by 2. Just like rotating a edge, rotating a face will deform all of the mesh that it is connected to, so it will be the 4 planes that make up that. If you grab it, again, it extends it. Scaling it is proportional to whatever the dimensions were, and then if you rotate it, it will do everything equally itself, and that is the moving around the meshes themselves. And that's interacting with both or all 3 modes of face, edge, and vertice. Go back to wireframe here. Alright, I think we're pretty much done with the default cube as far as just getting familiarization with the edge itself. Now, for anybody that feels comfortable and wants to follow along on their VRM, we're going to make a vertex group. And by vertex group, I mean we're going to take 1 or more vertex and we're going to give them a certain set of properties. If you're not comfortable enough yet, you can go ahead and skip this part and go to the next one. For everybody that's feeling comfortable and wants to mess around with their VRM, this will be the little bonus round for this particular video. But for the rest of you, thank you for watching. Alright, our default cube is deleted. We're going to go ahead and import a model. I'm going to go ahead and work with a similar that it was last time. And for the rest of the series, I'll be working with this one. So I'm going to zoom in, and now's a good time to show how the scene collection also works. So you will see that we have a collection inside of a collection. Like this one particular piece has multiple things inside of it. So we have poses, we have the armature. Let me click off. The armature are the bones inside of it, and our wings do have bones. We have the combined standard mesh, which is what we'll be working in just a second. And then we have the secondary, which isn't something we really need to get into today. So inside the combined mesh, I'm going to zoom in just a bit here and then zoom out because this is where we're going to be working. So I'm going to go to edit mode, and you're going to see we have a shit ton of vertices and everything to work with. So we're going to go here. We're going to go down to the data. We're going to go down here, and we are going to make a Booba 2 shape key. So specifically for this, because this model, your model may end up like my model, where I have 2 sided selected inside of our optimizer, so both the front and the back of both the clothing and the actual model itself has inside and outside vertices. I will show you just real quick. So you can see that there is a lot of polygon and a lot of vertices going on inside this particular piece, but it is a combined mesh, so if I affect one, it affects the ones below it. Just to show you that real quick, but we're going to go back to shader preview, and we're going to create a shape key. So we're going to make, we can do this with a vertex group, or we can do this with a shape key. I'm going to go ahead and do it with a shape key. All right, so I'm going to select these. Yeah, we're going to go ahead and select this one, this one, this one. Whoop, accidentally forgot to hold the shift key. Does that look right? Actually, scratch that. We're going to select this one, and then the outside two here as well. So these two, yeah, these two. We're going to add a shape key, which to do this we need to be in object mode. So I'm going to put my cursor over here, go to object mode. I'm going to add a shape key. We're going to name it Booba. Should have done this first, but it's whatever. In fact, we're going to name it Booba 2 because you might actually already have a Booba, depending on what versions of the models you have. It should be on launch, but I just want to make sure. So we're just going to name it Booba 2. Then we're going to go to edit mode. We're going to select those vertices back. And then make sure they kind of look right. Yeah, they look right. All right, so from here, we're going to go to proportional editing. On proportional editing, we're going to adjust proportional editing. I don't know why this windowed. So we're going to adjust it to 0.15. I will show you real quick why. So I'll put it at 0.15. I'll escape out. I'll hit scale, and you can see our sphere of influence is this gray circle around the actual Booba themselves, and it affects the mesh that we will be pulling on. If you make it too big or you can't see it, like if you leave it at 1, woo, that's not what we want to do. If you leave it on 1 and you go to scale, you end up moving the whole mesh. And in fact, you can't see the circle of influence at all. So right click off if that happened to you. So again, sphere of influence would be 0.15. We're going to scale. We're going to scale it out. Be careful of the mesh over here. So if it's starting to break, your scale is too big. Alright, that's good there. Then, so we'll go tab, we'll go into weight, and we'll go to value. You can see that we're now being able to adjust the size. We're not quite done yet, as we want to add one more shape key. And we want to be able to center them so they're not just blowing out the place. And then we're going to go back to edit mode. We're going to select those same two. Whoops, that was shift. And this time we're going to scale on the Y. I'm sorry, the X. We're going to bring them in a bit. We're going to narrow them in just a little bit. So that's where it was. We're going to snap them in just a bit so they're not exploding like out of the sides, so it doesn't actually start breaking mesh and causing armpit issues. So they look a little bit more natural anyways. And that is our Booba slider. So we're going to go back to object mode. We're going to value out this guy. We're going to bring them in, and then we're going to bring those out. Or you can leave them out like this, and you can scale those out so they're huge. But I don't know that you want to do that to this model's back, so I'm going to leave mine back at 0. I'm going to set it back to 0 as soon as it lets me. And set this back to 0. And we are back to the model. Now, if you want to save this, whatever scale between 1 and 0 you want, say you want to go huge, and you want to export this model and save this particular model. So what you're going to do is you're going to go to export, you're going to go to VRM, You're going to name it .vrm, and then this will save this version of the VRM, and now you technically have two models. I will bring this up real quick. Documents, and now you see we have the Booba VRM slider saved. So we'll go ahead and delete this guy. We will import the original, which is this one. Take a second. We'll grab everything, move her over just a bit, and we'll import the new one. It will take just a second, and you can see that there is a difference. And that is augmenting the mesh. Thank you. I'll talk to you next time. Easier to see because you are selecting the whole face.